Welcome to the Futures Forum Live online, where we explore the landscape and byways of our shared futures. On this edition of the Futures Forum Live, we exchange ideas, information, education, and inspiration about the future of Black America. For more information, visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Get Futures Sense now. Share this story and share our future. Stay tuned for a journey to the future with host Dr. Claire Nelson.
Greetings and welcome to the Futures Forum Live, an online e-magazine of the Futures Forum. February is Black History Month, and so we're having a series of conversations on the future history of Black America. Why? I wanted to examine just what life might be like for people of African descent in the United States. I'm particularly interested in the issue of the future of inequality, in large part because the UN Agenda 2030 speaks to, Goal 10 in particular, about meeting and addressing this issue within countries, and that's a big agenda for the United States. So who better to have this conversation with than somebody who actually writes a lot, researches, and helps to design the future. He is Professor Lonny J. Brooks. He's an associate professor in the communications department at California State University in East Bay. He has also been co-principal investigator of the Long-Term and Futures Thinking in Education project and has done some work writing on Afro-Futurism, as well as designing games that help people to imagine the future and help to solve challenges. So I think we're going to get a lot about what could happen and what we could do about it from our guest. Welcome, Professor Lonny Brooks.
Thank you. It's great to be here and join this.
Well, I'm glad that you could join us. I hope we can hear you. You're sound a little bit far away, but hopefully the audience will be able to hear the sound. Although I might have to actually transcribe you, I'm sure. I'm so excited to talk to you. So 2030, one of the things that caught my fancy was this notion of creating games, right? For thinking about the future.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, definitely. We do a game jam at Cal State East Bay every quarter, and I work with my colleague there, who's the head of the multimedia graduate program, Ian Pollock, and we've been doing a game called Minority Reports, Minority Reports 2.0, and alternative visions of the future. And so we play with the movie title, Minority Reports, that was with Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
Play that on that term. You know, what does Minority Reports mean?
Yes.
In fact, we're not minorities at all in the world.
Right.
And so what does that mean to try to understand alternative visions of the future? So what we have done is we've taken a game from Stuart Candy that he designed called The Thing from the Future.
Yes.
And we've hacked it up. So we take 4 scenarios that is from Jim Dator of transformation, collapse, growth, and discipline. And we look at the near-term future. And what we noticed was that particular game, in terms of the terms that it used, for instance, left out words like diaspora, immigration, racism, inequality, handbag even, and we did this experiment with our students where they did a mini version of this before we went to the real game jam, and they were noticing these terms that were missing, and then part of this future game also involves creating a mood. What is the mood of the object from the future that you're creating? And so some of our students basically looked at the mood. They looked at what an object of the future might be for Black America and looked at the context. What would be the terrain?
So tell me, so give an example, if you can remember, of one of the objects in the future that have come up in your game series, in your game jams?
Yeah, we actually had a really interesting game that was created, which was protest against the fake news. So basically, it was about creating camouflage for protesters if they're being if they're under surveillance. So that was one of the objects for the future, was camouflage.
oh my God! So that sort of says then one of the futures that the young people you're working with are imagining is a dystopian future where you're going to have fake news. And this is interesting because the study I just did with women futurists talks about increasing trend of fake news for propaganda purposes. So if that rate was an increasing trend and it was at its zenith in the year 2030 or so, some other clever person might do a facial recognition, a camouflage lotion or something, that when the camera hits it, it pixelates your face so you can't.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, and the actual name was Get Ahead of the Fake News. So it was like, how do the protesters, camouflage themselves, but then reveal the truth at the same time, using new types of technologies like augmented reality, virtual reality.
Yeah, because, and just let me say that this is you're talking about 2054. So you're way beyond 2030. So it would seem to me that you're almost saying that in the next 12 years, you're not seeing any improvements in the life of Black America. You're not seeing that the way technology is going, we're going to be able to address with any serious dent in the inequalities and inequities. Is that what you're saying?
Partially, I'm also saying that maybe and perhaps Black America gets better at creating its own more robust resources for the future. What me and my colleagues have realized too, especially in a podcast that we started called the Afro-Futurist Podcast as well, that we actually have to create our own institutions about the future too. Just as the NAACP was started at the beginning of the 20th century, we also have to start a digital movement for Black America in the beginning of the 21st. And
well, I'm very excited about this, and in fact, this is really heartening from my perspective. One of my concerns by this whole series in the first place, and by this provocative name, Future History, because I'm just concerned we always seem to be reacting to what is. And I'm sure there are individuals, because I hear about fantastic scientists doing fantastic things, but in terms of the social engineering that needs to happen so that there's a collective movement, I'm not really seeing any, let's say, innovation in the civil rights movement or the social justice movements or the environmental justice movements. They tend to be using the same technologies and techniques as we have done from the time of slavery and immemorial. So when you look at this work, for example, the book Afrofuturism 2.0 and the Rise of Astro-Blackness, what do you mean by Astro-Blackness?
Well, it's that idea that we are able to envision the future, kind of reclaim the past in terms of, we actually kind of see Afrofuturism through the past initially as being taken from our home world to an alien planet, where the latest technology at the time was used to enslave us. Mm-hmm. And now we can actually turn that narrative around to augment the future more robustly. So Astro-Blackness means projecting out, projecting our souls, our minds, that we've actually done for hundreds of years through sonic utopias, sonic fictions, through song. Spirituals were all about imagining the future. So Astro-Blackness just augments that idea even further, that we're going to go into space.
Well, I guess you're then saying that given what's happening with the real rise of artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, and now this new, I guess, interest in animated heroes who are Black, how do you see some of your real life concerns playing out in the artistry that is now, let's say, emerging and becoming much more visible?
Well, we with Ronaldo Anderson and our other futurist folks, such as ourselves, we've created the Black Speculative Arts Movement Festival, and we did a version of that on our campus called Black Imagine Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
We looked at alternative visions for Oakland too,
mm-hmm.
and had different speakers like Karen Zenarofru, who did an exhibit called The Black Woman is God. And so she's really trying to turn the narrative around in terms of seeing Black women as more empowered, more powerful, and it's an amazing exhibition.
But I mean, I'm going to stop you right there, because when you say the Black woman as God, you do recognize that in the movie The Matrix, the Oracle was a Black woman.
Yeah, that's right.
And then also that very popular Christian fiction book, The Shack, the face of God was a Black woman.
That's
so
right.
I mean, is this like sort of a trend in terms of, and I think The Shack was written by a white person, so there's obviously no interest in it from that perspective, but maybe there is something to be said about this idea of even mainstream writers using these now, let's say, mystique and mysterious figures such as Black women might seem to be to some people, as this otherworld character. Now, is that good or is that bad?
I think overall, if it's done by Black artists such as Karen Zenarofru, who's a adjunct English professor and artist on our campus at Cal State East Bay, I think she hits the nail on the head. She does it right. She captures the essence of what that means, not only just an empowered Black woman, but an empowered Black family too. And so that's what gives me more hope in terms of the artistry that I'm seeing out of here. And so she's really taken that idea and animated it. In fact, she's going to be doing some virtual reality and robotics around this idea of Black women as God too. She's inspired by the Congo PC figures who are about objects in time. And so she wants to animate them in a sense to give them kind of the spirit of the Black woman as God. And so I think, we're seeing that as a positive direction, kind of even taking it out of what maybe popular culture sees it and putting it really in the hands of artists who know what they're doing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So could you repeat that name of that artist professor again? I didn't really hear it so clearly. Your sound keeps going in and out.
Oh, okay. It's Karen Zenarofru.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you are at let's say the beginning of this rise, if you will, of, well, I wouldn't say rise, because you guys have been at this for how long now?
Oh, yeah. It's been about almost 3 or 4 years now in terms of Afro. Well, more than that. I mean, but the second wave of Afrofuturism as an academic discipline has really come in the last 3 to 4 years.
So if we step back from 2054 and some of the, let's say, very speculative futures, and we bring it back to 2030, which is not so speculative. After all, most of us can imagine ourselves being alive in 12 years. Most of us can imagine what life would be like. What are some of the things you are envisioning in terms of urban futures in the next 15 years, 2035, for example? What will the inner city be like? Is it going to be something like, if we start now and you're doing scenario work now, can we define the policies and programs that could get us to something that's much more livable?
Yes, in fact, some people have been working with restorative justice here in Oakland, and also did what imagined, along with the Institute for the Future, which is based in Palo Alto, looked at what would the city of Oakland look like as a restorative justice city. So not just individual institutions, but as a collective enterprise. So instead of sending people to prisons where they just get worse, what would it be like if we transform prisons into centers of entrepreneurial creativity, and learning? So they actually become the learning centers that they've always been in many ways. And really,
I think your sound just went.
Oh,
I hope not. I think, wait.
I'm still here.
Okay, great. So I'm very excited to hear that. So what I was going to ask you was that, so this is currently the scenario was done. Has the scenario been actually tried to put into practice in any way? Has anybody taken a look at actualizing this exercise?
Well, I mean, for instance, the Oakland Unified School District does incorporate restorative justice. In fact, my neighbor down the street, David Usen, heads that effort too. And it has a lot of stakeholders and input from the Black community as for restorative justice. So that is definitely on the ground now. And it's gaining steam across the city. And so this idea of, I do see a time where prisons can become centers of more creativity, that it's not just a place where people go to serve out and reinforce, horrible, dysfunctional personalities, but actually become more empowered to become the creative business.
To become more human in a sense, because to the extent that their dysfunctions create this quote unquote ease in the regular community because of the disruptions of whatever violent crimes they may have committed. You're saying we can reimagine prisons as a time for people to go away and learn to become more human and to be therefore reintegrated. So in sense, restorative justice by not sending them away and locking them far away, but they're doing things in areas which are more close in and taking it to be, they're staying around the city in some way. Is that what they're doing?
Yes.
So is this in terms of policy? This is kind of policy which might become very important for public policy. Do you have a lot of let's say, support from some of the foundations that are interested in social justice? Are you seeing a sort of uptake in investing in these sort of living experiments?
Yes, in fact, Tessa Finlev from the Institute for the Future came to speak at Black Imagine Oakland. And so she is definitely a stakeholder in this and a proponent of this idea. And not only that, we have what's called the Hayward Promise neighborhood that just received a few $1 million from the federal government to look at. We've actually done a forecasting exercise on our campus where we actually looked at cradle to grave learning, so that through the Hayward Promise neighborhood and through other ventures like that, the campus becomes a part of the fabric of the community where learning happens everywhere. So just imagine a woman, a Black woman coming into a workshop, a community university workshop. She just passes it by and it's on the street in the public. You can see things happening, and she stops in and she takes a look at it and she says, "Oh, what's happening here? Well, we're building prototypes of the future. Would you be interested in joining in and having your voice heard about this?" And she says, "Oh yeah, I would love my kids to, work on this too." So she becomes, we bring the learning to the people there too. Not only do they have to come up to the campus, and that might be an opportunity that she looks at too later, but that it becomes more of a seamless web of learning where we really see learning happening, not just in a classroom, but on the street, literally on the street.
So as we think then about Black America 2030 or Black America 2.0 or 3.0, depending on where we are, given where we are politically, given where we are economically, given the current angst around Black Lives Matter, for example, but looking at the sort of work you're doing in terms of investigating what you call future social cultural memories, not just the ones of the past, but actually the ones that are occurring even now. How do you think you'll be able to take some of what you're doing in the research space and make it more popular so we can actually try to drive and shape the future and your research becomes even more action oriented than it is today, what would need to happen?
Well, first of all, my colleague and I, if you know Ahmed Best, he's my colleague and co-executive producer for the Afro-Futurist Podcast. By the way, he played Jar Jar Binks in Star Wars, and his family comes from the Caribbean. We started the Afro-Futurist Podcast to actually create a distribution network of talent, because he went to the studios with an idea for a Black Star Trek, and the studio said to him, "Oh, well, Black people aren't interested in the future, are they?" And so
Black Americans don't do what?
The studios told him, "Well, Black America isn't interested in the future."
Oh.
And this was a few years ago. But
wow.
Yeah. So we were like, wait a minute. So we just decided to start this podcast together where we bring on people in all, academia, industry, film, television, art, and talk about the future. What might happen. We're on our 9th episode right now, and you can find us on iTunes as well.
Well, I definitely would want to say that what we're doing with this very special series, just for the month of February, should really be, I would say, dovetailed back into what you're doing. Because the whole point of this exercise, for me, I'm really focused on, development policy. And my view of Black America is that it's a developing country in a first world country. Yes. And therefore, my experience as a development sustainability engineer and working as a futurist is how do we actually begin to have the kind of conversations and the kind of workshops and the kind of literature that intentionally sets out a trajectory. So the self-fulfilling prophecy is not more gangs and not more crime and not more violence and not more hunger, but the self-fulfilling prophecy is tuned to a more aspirational view. And yes, we know there's not any utopias. I was going to ask you, for example, what are you calling this space, which is not a utopia and not a dystopia? What are you calling that space?
That's a good question. I think of it as, well, we have this term to chart the space, Afro-future types, and this idea of an Afro-futurescape, too, to actually try to create that as that intermediate space where we're looking at, how can we bring the past and the present into the future together. So I kind of think of it as an Afro-futurescape. In fact, another organization that's doing similar types of work is the Black Quantum Futurists, or Futurism, too, with Rashida.
Is it who?
It's called Black Quantum Futurism. Rashida Phillips and Moorhead, or Moore Mother, that is.
Yes.
I think what we're seeing are these kind of nascent institutions that are strengthening more robust futures, actually anchoring them in the communities and trying to create this, what you said, this intermediate space between dystopia and utopia. I think that's really, really well put. And so I think of it as a landscape, as an Afro-futurescape, and that the signals of this Afro-futurescape to navigate it are what I call Afro-future types. They're signals, a constellation of signals of Black America that have kind of, signals of hope and progress, and addressing dystopian impulses too.
Well, I have been calling this space myself a normatopia, as in it's a normal, it's a new normal, whatever that new normal is. It's not going to be the worst space in which we ever lived, and it won't be the best space in which we ever lived, because that's part of the human condition. We almost must have a challenge, but it will be we can design stories about the future that just have what we call the new kind of challenges, such as if you need to have a camouflage thing, in order to protest, so you're not locked up from protesting. Now, as we wrap up, as we think about then your work as a professor in a very, let's say, very eclectic and forward-thinking part of America. California East Bay is known to be that. How are you seeing then making your work, which is very academic to some extent, and really pushing it out even to much more popular words? So for example, the game jamming. How can we take that work and bring it out into the more common world so that your work does have a larger impact on helping us shape a more, optimistic future than many people are seeing right now?
Well, I'd say one effort has been the Black speculative arts movement that's been occurring in different cities, and that's kind of bridging artists, future and Afro-Futurism together. And so that's one pathway too. We're also working with a new communal computing space called Dynamic Land in downtown Oakland, where we're going to have our Minority Reports 2.0 game jam in the spring. And so that's going to be right on the doorstep of, right in the heart of Oakland.
Let me ask a question. How challenging would it be to do a Minority Reports, let's say in Washington? What would you need? Let's say you were going to do it, have a West Coast, East Coast. What would it take for us to do something like that on the East Coast?
Well, not much. It just takes, a bunch of good art supplies, a good room, it could be a community room, a classroom, some printing supplies, a few computers, and we're good to go. It's meant to be mobile. It's meant to be improvisational. We have students that they come together from different disciplines and walks of life and pitch ideas based on a theme like Minority Reports and pitch their vision of the future. They get into groups and then they develop a game over the course of a weekend or a day even. It can even be done in a day. And then they come out with actual prototypes that can go on to be developed into games too. In fact, we're working with another group in Oakland called Game Heads that teaches and is developing a Black aesthetics of design for gaming. And that's run by Damon Packwood too. So basically, I think the future is really about creating these robust Black networks that will get these ideas and get these methods to the people.
Do you have any kind of, let's say, quote unquote, guidebook if somebody wanted to kind of do something like this? Because I am imagining right now, as a result of this conversation, hopefully 3 more people beside myself would say, hey, we would like to do something like that. Now we'll have five locations, right? And, we then be able to have these jams simultaneously. So, we're running them on the same day in 5 locations. And then at some point, there's a mega exchange, and really beginning to have a real mashup or a game jamathon then. An Afro-Futurist game jamathon, right?
Yeah.
And see if we really can't get the imagination of more people turned on, because sometimes when we're talking about these things and we are using very what we call arcane academic languages, it's very hard to explain to people and to get them, especially people who are not in a university context, get them involved. But I'm hoping that you have a guidebook. Do you?
Yeah, well, we do have a mini guidebook right now that we put together, and that it's growing. So we laid it down, we put it into writing, and put some of the steps down, and we're.
Well, I think we should just make a call to action and plan to have a game-a-thon in September. During Congressional Black Caucus Week in Washington D.C. If you can't make it to the East Coast, we still start to promote it, get the word out, and say, hey, be part of a massive Futures Game Jam on Howard University campus, to design a future university or whatever, or future,
fantastic.
Yeah. Something that's gonna say, help us imagine the future more clearly.
I love it. In fact, I did propose that in an article I wrote about having kind of this citywide, national game jam. So you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, you know what I mean? Like that.
All right. Well, I think we're onto something. I think we're about to wrap up now. If I'm going to ask you two more questions. One question is, would you say you're optimistic based on all the research you're doing, the game jams, what you're picking up from your young charges? Are you optimistic, pessimistic, or neutralistic about the future?
Well, you know what? I tend to be more optimistic. Even in the darkness, which I feel like we're going through.
Yeah.
I feel like there's the seeds of a new renaissance here, and that it's growing, and that we always had to plant seeds, and they grow. It took hundreds of years to end slavery. It begins with a conversation, and that conversation is ongoing, and we have to add our voices to it, or we'll be lost. So I always feel like optimism is the best strategy, because we can and do have agency,
Yeah. So on that note then, let's come back to where we started, 2054, right?
Yes.
Minority Reports. Do you have, so now we're in 2054 and we're looking out at 2100. Let me tell you, wait a minute. Yeah. We could be alive in 2054. You know that, right?
No.
In 2054, I would be 96 years old, so I could very much be alive. So I'm not, being spurious here. So 2054, looking out at 2100, when we know we'll not be here, right? What is the optimistic headline that you are now observing for today in 2054?
Well, it's interesting that you said that, because actually it's been declared that we have been able to augment our lives by not just 500 years, but by 1,000 years through augmentation. And we're able to actually connect our memories together to a greater Black memory that actually gives us more power too. So we're actually able to connect in a much more powerful fashion too. Virtual reality, augmented reality, and communal computing. And so that with this extension of lifespan has also become a deeper memory of power. And I think that's what...
Well, your voice is fading. What did you say?
And so along with that life extension, we also have a deeper Black memory that gives us power and literally powers to fashion our own future, for the next 1,000 years or more.
Well, folks, as you have it, that is Professor Lonny A.V. Brooks' vision of the future of Black America. He is certainly taking us on a wild ride through a matrix of ideas and provided us some visions from Minority Reports in 2054. Thank you so much, Professor Brooks, for being a part of our conversation series.
I'm so glad to have this conversation. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
And I want to say, folks, we're looking forward to having a game jam here in the Washington, D.C. area. And actually, we're looking forward to spreading this idea of having a national game jam so we can get the Black community really focused about creating a future American dream that works in our image. Thank you for joining us on the Futures Forum Live, where we explore salient ideas for sustainable futures. Remember, the future is embedded in the landscape we see today. So, seize the future and make it your own. Safe journeys.
You have been listening to the Futures Forum Live online. This podcast aims to tell and share stories about the emerging future and help us better shape the future we want. The Futures Forum Live online is a production of the Futures Forum in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Get future sense now. Remember, our future is embedded in the landscape of the present. Share this story and share the future.